F review. If you wish to find the square footage of a parcel of property or of a space, you're going to multiply the length times the width. So in this diagram on the screen, you have a space that is 6 feet by 8 feet. For example, if you wish to put carpeting in that space, you would need the square footage, so you would multiply 6 times 8, 48 square feet. If you have a property that is 120 feet by 80 feet and you want to lay sod on the property, you would need the square footage. Again, you multiply length times width. So 120 times 80 would be 9,600 square feet of sod that you would need for this particular piece of property. If you were going to fence the property, you would need linear feet of fencing. So you would have to add all the sides up. So to fence this particular piece of property, you'd need 120 linear feet on one side, 80 feet on the other, 120 feet again, and another 80 feet. So you would need 400 linear feet of fencing. Front footage is defined as the measure of a property on its street line. So in this diagram, the front footage would be 80 feet. So if the property was for sale at $200 a front foot, you would multiply the $200 times the 80 front feet to give you $16,000. In that scenario, the 120 feet would not be important. So if you have a property which is 100 feet wide by 180 feet deep and it just sold for $400 a front foot, you have a commission of 6% of the sales price. What amount will the broker receive? Well, first of all, you have to find out what the property sold for. You have 100 front feet at $400 a front foot, so you multiply that and you get $40,000 for the sale price. And if the broker is receiving 6% commission, you multiply that by 6%, the broker would receive $2,400. You cannot multiply feet times inches. So in the next scenario, Joe is pouring a sidewalk measuring 5 feet wide, 10 feet long, and 6 inches high. 6 inches is 0.5 or 1/2 of a foot. So you need cubic feet here. You need volume, length times width times height. So 5 feet times 10 feet by 0.5 of a foot or 1/2 of a foot, which is the equivalent of 6 inches, would give you 25 cubic feet. Prorations. If you have a property where the taxes have been paid through December of 2022, what that means is they have been paid through the last day of that year, which for the purposes of prorations will be December 30th, because we are always going to use 30 days in a month. So the sellers paid their property taxes through the end of the year of 2022, but they live in the property and they own the property until April 23rd of 2024. So they lived in the property in this example for 1 year, 3 months, and 23 days and have not paid the taxes. What that means is that the seller will have to give a credit to the buyer at the closing for the amount of time they lived and owned the property and have not yet paid the taxes. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the amount of taxes, 6,282, and divide that by 12. That'll give you $523.50 a month. And then we're going to divide that by 30 because, again, we always use 30 days in a month. That'll give us $17.45 for each day for the taxes. So we have 2 dates that we'll work with here. The closing date is April 23rd, 4/23 of 2024. And the taxes are paid through the last day of 2022, which is 12/30 of 2022, because again, we're going to use 30 days in a month. So now we have to subtract, but we cannot subtract 30 from 23. So what we have to do is we have to go over to the 4 months and borrow a month. So we're going to take a month away from 4 months and make it 3 months. But then we have to do something with that month. So we're going to add a month to the 23 days. So we did have 4 months and 23 days. Now, if you look below, we have 3 months and 53 days. It's the same amount of time. But now we can subtract the 30 days from the 53 days. That will give us 23 days. So now we have to come over to the next column, and we cannot subtract 12 months from 3 months. So what we have to do is we have to go over to the years, and we're going to take a year away from 2024 and make that 2023, but we have to do something with the year. So we're going to add 12 months to the 3 months to make it 15 months. So we did have 2024 in 3 months. Now we have 2023 in 15 months. It's the same amount of time. Now we can subtract 12 months from 15 months. That gives us 3 months. And then 22 from 23 is 1 year. So 1 year, 3 months, and 23 days is the amount of time that the seller will owe the buyer for taxes that they incurred but have not yet paid. So we do our math here. 1 year, we said 1 year in taxes is $6,282. We have 3 months at $523.50 a month will give us $1,570.50 for the 3 months, and 23 days at $1,745 a day will give us $401.35. So you add the $62.82 for the 1 year, the $1,570.50 for the 3 months, and the $401.35 for the 23 days. Add those together, and you're going to get $8,253.85 credit to the buyer. In the next scenario, you have property taxes of $1,250, and they have been paid in advance for the year. So what that means is that the seller paid them in advance, but the property closes on June 23rd. So in this scenario, the buyer is going to owe the seller some money, because the buyer is going to take the property and live in the property up until the end of the year, and the taxes have already been prepaid by the seller. So we have 2 dates that we're looking here. The taxes were paid through 12/30, and the closing date took place on 6/23. So we take that $1,250 divided by 12, that equates to $104.166 a month, divided by 30, $3.47 a day. So we can subtract here 23 days from 30 days, gives us 7 days at $3.47 a day for $24.29. Subtract 6 months from 12 months, that will give us 6 months at $104.166 a month, $624.96. You add them together and you get $649.25. This time it's going to be a credit to the seller because they have prepaid those taxes. For tax bill calculations, you're going to start out with the market value of a property. You're going to multiply it by an assessment ratio to give you an assessed valuation. And then you may or may not get an equalization factor, which you will then apply to the assessed valuation to get an equalized value. The taxes will be asked of you in one of 3 ways, either in mills, which is a mill is 1/10 of a cent or 1/1000th of a dollar, per $100 of value, or per $1,000 of value. And we're going to show you how to do each scenario. So the first example, you have a home with a market value of $105,000. You're going to multiply it by your assessed ratio of 60% to give you $63,000 in an assessed valuation. They're also giving you an equalization factor of 1.25. You're going to multiply that to give you an equalized value of $78,750. The easiest way to do the mills, when you get the number of mills, multiply it by 0.001. So 30 mills would be the equivalent of 0.030. Then you will multiply it by your equalized value to give you annual taxes of $2,362.15. But you'll note that is not your answer because the question asks you for the quarterly taxes. So you have to divide that by 4. You will get $590.62 quarterly taxes. In the next scenario, if you have a market value of $230,000 and it's assessed at 65%, you would multiply that out, and that would give you $149,500 assessed valuation. In this problem, they are not giving you an equalization factor, so that is the number you will work off of. The taxes are per $100 of assessed value, so you have to find out how many increments of 100 are in that $149,500. So you'll divide by 100, and that will give you 1,495 increments. You then have to multiply by your tax dollars of $4.50 to give you annual taxes of $6,727.50. But not your answer, because they are asking you for semi-annual taxes, which means twice a year. So you divide by 2 to give you $3,363.75 semi-annual taxes. The next scenario, if you have a home that has an assessed value of $180,000 and the tax rate is $1,250 per $1,000 of assessed value, what are the monthly taxes? So they're skipping the math to get you to the assessed valuation, which they're just giving you the assessed valuation of 180, which you got by multiplying the assessed ratio by your market value. But they're just giving you the assessed value here. And they're giving you a tax rate of $1,250 per $1,000 of value. So you have to find out how many increments of 1,000 are in that 180,000. So you take the 180,000, divide by 1,000, will give you 180 increments, times your tax dollars of $1,250, which will give you $2,250 in annual taxes. But that is not your answer, because the question asked you for the monthly taxes. So you divide that by 12, $187.50 a month. In the next problem, you have a selling price of a property of $96,000. This can be financed if the buyer can put 10% down and pay a loan origination fee of 1.5%. How much cash must the buyer produce to complete the transaction? Well, what we know is the selling price is $96,000 and the buyer is putting 10% down. 10% of $96,000 gives him a $9,600 down payment. If the buyer is putting 10% down, that means he's getting a loan for 90% of the sale price. So we'll need that loan amount, because we have to figure out the loan origination fee. So 90% of the loan amount is 90% of the selling price is $86,400 loan amount. You need the loan amount because the loan origination fee is going to be 1.5% of the loan amount. That will give you $1,296 loan origination fee. So the buyer will need the down payment of $9,600 plus the $1,296 in loan origination fee. The buyer is going to have to produce $10,896 for this transaction. Next, we have a buyer of a $125,000 home. He's already paid $2,000 as earnest money. He has a loan commitment for 70% of the purchase price. How much more does the buyer need to complete the transaction? Well, if he's getting a loan commitment for 70%, that means his down payment is 30%. So 30% of the sales price is a down payment of $37,500. But he has already put $2,000 down as earnest money. That earnest money will be credited back to him at the closing, which means that this buyer will need another $35,500 to complete the transaction. In an appraisal situation where you have income producing property, what you're going to be looking at is the total gross income of a property minus its operating expenses. And you're also going to be looking at a capitalization rate, which is the rate of return the investor wants to yield. So for the appraisal problems, we're going to take a look at the IRV formula on your screen. When you are using the IRV formula, and we will use it for appraisal problems, for interest on loan, as well as commission problems, the formula is the same. The I divided by the R will give you the V. The I divided by the V will give you the R, or the R times the V will give you the I. In order for this formula to work, you have to have the ability to get 2 out of those 3 numbers. So in an appraisal problem, in a cap rate problem, the I is going to represent income on the property, but it's not the gross income that is brought in. It is the annual net operating income. And the way you arrive at the annual net operating income is you take your gross income and you deduct your annual expenses. The R is the cap rate or the capitalization rate. That's the rate of return that the investor wants to yield on this property. And the V is the value or what the property is worth. So in this problem, you have a building that's valued at $215,000. That number, that $215,000, can go into the V on your formula. It has 4 apartments that rent for $470 each month. So $470 a month times 4 apartments gives you $1,880 monthly income on that building. But we need annual income. So we're going to multiply that by 12. It'll give you $22,560 annual gross income. That number still cannot go into the I, into your formula, because the I, again, is annual net operating income, which you get by deducting the annual expenses from your gross income. That will give you, with your $7,896 annual expenses, $14,664 annual net operating income. That is the number that can be inserted into the I. So now you have the $14,664 annual net operating income divided by the V, which is the $215,000 value on the property. That will give you 7% cap rate. When you have a property that is a special use property, or it's maybe even an unusual residential property where you have nothing to compare it to, you have no comparables, and it does not produce income, the appraiser might use the cost approach. So the basic formula for the cost approach is you take what it would cost to replace or reproduce the building, but that building won't be brand new. So you have to deduct accrued depreciation. That will give you a depreciated value of a property, but that's not the entire value, because you then have to add in the land or the site value. And that will give you the value per the cost approach. So if it would cost $105,000 to construct this building today, but again, the building's not new, so you would have to deduct for depreciation, and we're going to use 4% depreciation here. So $105,000 to build it today, but it's depreciated $4,200. That gives you a depreciated value of the property of $100,800. But then you have to add in the land or the site value. So your total value per the cost approach would be $150,800. Using straight line depreciation in this next problem, we have a building that costs $360,000, and it's currently 10 years old, and it has a remaining useful life of 50 years. So the total useful life on this property is a total of 60 years, because it's already 10 years old, it has another 50 to go. So 360,000 divided by 60 years, its total life, its total useful life, will give you $6,000 a year. And the property is already 10 years old, so its total depreciation to date would be that $6,000 a year times the 10 years would be $60,000. When you have a residential property, for example, or vacant land or a condo or a co-op, the appraiser would use the sales comparison approach. You compare properties that have already sold and closed to your subject property. In other words, the subject property has no price because you're trying to determine what that is worth. So if you have a subject property and then you have comparable properties to compare it to, the comparable property is already sold and closed. You're not going to change what it's sold and closed for, but you're going to make adjustments in what that property sold and closed for to see what your subject property should sell for. Now, in this example, you have a subject property. It has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, but your comparable, which is already sold, has only 2 bedrooms and 2 baths. So the comparable should not be worth as much as your subject. So if your comparable, say, sold for $100,000, shouldn't your subject sell for a little bit more than that, because it's got an extra bedroom? And the problem is telling us the extra bedroom was worth $5,000. So if the comparable sold for $100,000, shouldn't your subject property sell for $5,000 more? It should, so $105,000. So if you have a positive amenity in your comparable, you make a negative adjustment in the price. And if you have a negative amenity in your comparable, you make a positive adjustment in the price. You are never going to adjust the price of the subject. You have no price. You're trying to determine what it should sell for. You're only going to make adjustments in what the comparable property sold for. Now, we have interest problems, and we are going to use the IRB formula once again. So in the IRB formula for your interest loan problems, the I is going to represent the total annual interest. The R is the rate of interest, and the V is the loan amount. So if you have a quarterly interest payment on a loan of $320,000 and that interest payment is $6,400, the $6,400 will go into the I, but you can't put it in there just yet. The interest goes into the I. You have to make it annual interest. So they're giving us quarterly interest. So 6,400 times 4 will give you annual interest of $25,600. That number can go into the I. We have a loan amount of $320,000. That can go into the V. So remember, the I divided by the V will give us the R. So if you have annual interest of $25,600 divided by your $320,000 loan amount, it's going to give you 8% rate of interest. In our next scenario here, there are a few more steps. We have Joan with a mortgage of $136,400. That number can go into the V. Interest rate is 7.75%. That number can go into the R. So the R times the V will give us the annual interest based on that loan amount. So if we multiply that out, that's going to give us annual interest of $10,571. So if we go down and divide that by 12, that's going to give us $880.92 monthly interest. She also has taxes and insurance that amount to $975 a year. If we divide that by 12, that comes out to $81.25 a month. So Joan, based on this loan amount, is paying $880.92 in interest and $81.25 for her monthly taxes and insurance. Remember, the components of the mortgage payments are principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So Joan's paying a total of $962.17 for interest, taxes, and insurance. So she makes out her check to the bank for $1,000, right? And when the bank gets that $1,000 check that month, they're going to take out $962.17 for taxes, interest, and insurance, which means that is only going to leave $37.83 to go to reduce her loan amount. So she started out the day with a loan balance of $136,400. After she made her $1,000 payment and the bank took out the money for the interest, taxes, and insurance, it only reduced her loan by $37.83. So now, month 2, her new loan balance is $136,362.17. And one more time, we're going to use the IRB formula for commissions. In a commission problem, the I, think of it as income. It's the total commission on the sale price of the property, not somebody's split, not one party is getting. The total commission that is paid out based on the sale price of the property. The V represents the sale price of the property, and the R is the rate of commission. So if the sponsoring broker received a 6.5% commission, that goes into the R, and that commission amounted to $15,200, that goes into the I. What was the sale price of the house? Well, we know that the I divided by the R will give us the V. So 15,200 is the I, divided by 6.5% is going to give us a value of $233,846.15.